Antimage and Isekai LitRPG Adventure, Ends of Magic Book 1. Audiobook by Kevin Chapter 17. Undead, come to roost. It took most of the night and part of the next day to settle matters with Azamer. Nathan had hoped it would be as simple as freeing all of the slaves and telling them to go to Giant's Rest. But of course it wasn't that easy. To be fair, it was far easier than conquering a city should have been. It took some argument to convince Hibril that he needed to abandon the city. He was attached to Azamer, but eventually accepted that an evacuation was necessary. Giant's Rest had the space and farmland to absorb the population in every one of its child cities. None of them were even a tenth of Giant's Rest size, and they had all been founded by ambitious mages looking to expand Giant's Rest's territory and provide access to raw materials, not because the capital had lacked food or space. But it would be significantly easier to defend one city instead of a half-dozen, and Mila and the forces of the new Giant's Rest would be unable to defend Azamer. Not too different from the villages of Gemor. Except Gemor doesn't have nearby farmland because of the ruined city, so they actually depend on their villages to provide food. And there's a ton of estates available for building, not to mention mansions that can fit a lot more than currently live in them. After that, Nathan and Kachai had gone around and freed most of the slaves of Azamer, starting with the slave soldiers, and then moving on down to the artisans and domestic slaves. Remembering Mila, he'd looked to Hibril's scribes to find leaders and found a dour man named Blan who handled logistics for the whole city. He hadn't shown any surprise at Nathan's request that he organize an evacuation, just acknowledging his freedom with a long blink before getting to work directing thousands of people towards Giant's Rest. Hibril had tried to help, but Blan had just given him a level look and ignored his previous master with a faintly satisfied smile. Nathan had been worried the ex-archmage would insert himself again, but instead he just watched the proceedings with a kind of dumbfounded bemusement, as if he hadn't been aware just how unnecessary he was until that very moment. Nathan sidled up next to him. "Will you be able to listen to ex-slaves when they tell you what to do?" Hibril shrugged, though he didn't look entirely content. "I never liked organization. I was good at politics, playing the other archmages off against each other. I like being left alone to watch my city grow." He turned to Nathan, baffled but not upset. "But I was never good at coordinating industry. I'll listen to the experts on matters of organization and combat, but on matters of magic none match my grasp at the founders." Nathan raised his eyebrows. "I know some of the mages of Gemor might disagree with you, Dalo and Kullo Kaxal in particular." A light lit inside Hibril's eyes. "Oh, the guardians of Gemor. They have some insights worthy of the giant." He pursed his lips thoughtfully. "I would like to trade insights with them. Can you make the introduction?" This is why I spared him and left as much of his magic intact as I could afford. I hope the Kaxals can take him for all he's worth. With a snort, Nathan called Stella over. "Stella, Hibril wants to trade insights with your parents. We probably won't be around long enough to do it ourselves, but can you introduce them via message?" "Their daughter." Hibril's eyes sharpened and his attention shifted fully to Stella. "Ah, that is the source of the wondrous fly insight. You are a mage of true talent. Now, what element of your fly spell is lacking refinement? I can see the mana leaks from here and would offer guidance." Stella was surprised by the offer but shot Nathan a questioning look before responding. "He's trying to get insights out of you. Decide beforehand what you're willing to trade." He gave her a warning look, trying to communicate that she be careful of speaking about what he'd taught her. She appeared to understand the warning, giving him a serious nod. Hibril didn't dispute Nathan's statement, and soon the two mages were engaged in a spirited discourse on the nature of flight magics. The Giant's Rest mage was providing a lot of advice without really asking for much in return. I think he's being somewhat political. If he's nice to Stella, she'll say good things to her parents and that will be his way into Gemor high society. Not a bad play. An hour later, Stella came and found Nathan with a dour look on her face. We need to leave. She'd already gathered up the rest of the heirs and they were all ready to go. It looked urgent, so Nathan didn't ask questions. Okay. He turned to the messenger who'd been directing him around the city to the as yet unfreed slaves. We're leaving. Tell Blan. There are more antimages in Giant's Rest who can free the remaining slaves. Moments later, the heirs were over the walls with Stella leading the way. She took them almost straight south. Once they'd gotten a few miles from the city, she adjusted their path to the west, towards Argles. I got a message from one of the mages with Mila. Cameron was kidnapped and tortured, but not killed. Nathan blinked. By a mage. You'd think they'd use mental magic to get whatever information they wanted. Stella shook her head. They think it was an assassin looking for us. He doesn't remember anything about the person who did it or even what they asked, but he's one of the people who knew where we were going. All right, so they're probably on their way to Azemir now, but if they couldn't track us out of Giant's Rest, they won't be able to track us out of Azemir. Nathan shrugged. So we've got time to camp and get some sleep. Argles tomorrow, Sarah spoke up, sounding ambivalent. Stella, you're the one who needs sleep the most. The mage grumbled. We need to reach Argles quickly, get some distance from Azemir. She set a fast pace and they traveled for several hours before making a quick camp in a hidden glade. They sorted out the watch details, then crashed hard. They got moving quickly and early the next morning. Breaking camp was a routine they'd done dozens of times, but now everything felt more urgent. In the past, they'd usually been moving at their own pace, on patrol or traveling on a mission. Even when they'd been in a hurry, breaking camp had been a routine, but now they rushed. There was at least one assassin on their tail, and a siege awaited them at Argles. Notably a siege where both the attackers and defenders were presumed hostile, but they still wanted to protect the population of the city. It's all a mess. We've been running hard and need more than just a night of rest. We don't really know what's waiting for us, but we're trusting our abilities to carry us through it. As they got moving, Nathan summed up his thoughts. We're in it, aren't we? These are the times that make us elites. It's not just winning the big battles, but going from one fight to another without pausing. It's never stopping when there's a problem to be solved. That's why they schedule Delve Day, Sarah responded grimly. To make sure the elite teams are ready for anything. They can't fight every day. You need time to rest, repair, heal. She shot an aggrieved look at Nathan and Kachai. Unless you have two madmen on your team, Nathan shrugged. There's stuff that needs doing. If you're tired, take it easy. I can probably carry this battle if I need to. I don't think there's much that can challenge me. I spoke truth before, Kachai rumbled back. I cannot be fatigued. I will fight without pause, Arl sighed. And we can't let Nathan get all the levels. I'll keep pace. And if I don't, well, Kachai can restore the dead. The wolfman's face turned down in a frown. That is an ability I would not test. I do not know its limits yet, and I do not think I can heal terrible injuries. Yet, Sarah replied with a snort. All we need to do is feed you levels, and then we can't die as long as you are alive. Except for Nathan. I've got my own version, Nathan replied with a shrug. Batad pretty much turned me to dust with the attack that destroyed the academy, but I developed regeneration again so it didn't stick. But if an enemy gets the upper hand over you, they can always figure something out. They could entomb me in stone, or a monster could tear me to pieces and swallow them, or they could throw me into a fire. Even if you can't die, it's still important not to lose. Hear me, that is a good problem to have, Stella said dourly. Then she brightened up. An attacking army of undead means hordes of weak foes. That seems like my problem to kill. Unless it's mostly giants, like that one monastery of Quaz, Sarah replied. Nathan's eyebrows shot up. You took down a monastery of Quaz. We did, Arl said wryly. Too close to some of the farms of Halsmith. It needed to go. Can you tell me about it? Nathan asked, curious about the adventures his friends had been up to while he'd been gone. Over the next few hours as they traveled, they told him about their adventures in clearing out the various dungeons and dangerous monsters around Housemint. Giant's Rest had kept a lid on the worst of it, but they hadn't tried to maintain the buffer zone of safety like Gemor did. After all, if their farmers got eaten, they could simply replace them. As they traveled, the clouds grew steadily heavier until the sun was mostly blocked off. The day grew dim and oppressive, and Nathan probed upwards with his magical senses. He found death mana high in the air, shaping the clouds and blocking the light. Nathan called it out to the rest of the heirs. This weather's unnatural. Death mana. It confirms Hibril's tale, Sarah said with a shrug. We have a fight ahead of us. Kachai's face was dour and he redoubled his speed. I pray that the city remains inviolate. Arl merely nodded and accelerated to keep up, resuming his story. He was dramatically retelling how he'd cleared out a nest of Earth stalkers almost single-handedly. Right when he got to the fight with the Patriarch, Stella interrupted him. She was flying the highest and pointed excitedly over the next rise. Arglas and an army of undead. She sounded positively thrilled by the latter. Nathan came over the rise and his impression was decidedly less positive than Stella's. Arglas was to the west and looked like a rock in the ocean, with tides of bones and decayed flesh washing against its high walls, barely being repulsed by surges of flame and lightning. The land was flooded with undead of every size and description, from humanoids up through monsters of all kinds. Giant stone statues stood in the center of the army, silently gazing towards the city as smaller undead streamed past their feet. Occupying the hills to the south were a trio of towering monstrosities, each formed of amalgams of thousands of corpses. Oh, 3 grave tangles, that's not good. Why aren't the grave tangles attacking? Arl asked, cocking his head as he studied the army from midair. They could push through the walls without pain, but they're letting the smaller undead burn. He gestured to where thousands of smaller undead lapped against the walls and were pushed back by surges of flame. Nathan examined the battlefield before responding. They're waiting until the mages defending Arglas get tired and run out of mana. He pointed at the larger creatures in the army. The statues and grave tangles are the important pieces. The smaller undead are incidental. They can make more. But this still suggests a lot of strategy for undead. That means we need to strike quickly, before they realize how much of a threat we are. Still a blasphemous number of undead, Sarah spoke dryly, eyes flicking around to pick out targets. Maybe it's time to follow the light and leave. Kachai didn't pick up on the sarcasm and strode forward, propelled by divine light. Do not let this enemy overwhelm you. They are a terrible foe, but we must defeat them, so we shall. This tide of death will wash all away unless it is confronted here. A golden glow unfurled from his form like wings, grander than anything Nathan had seen from him before. He lit up the entire battlefield, banishing some of the gloom in the air as he arrowed straight towards the center of the enemy army where the statues were. I summoned the strength to stand against this scourge. Arl merely sighed and rolled his eyes as his helmet crept over his head. He leaned forwards and sprinted after Kachai, angling for some undead stalkers that were circling the battlefield like sharks on the prowl. They fired night-black bolts from their central eyes before darting in, just as fast in death as they'd been in life. It didn't help. Arl dodged most of the attacks before cleanly dicing the stalkers into pieces. The dark magic never even reached Kachai, and the undead fell apart as his light illuminated them. They pulled back and circled around to attack his rear where the aura wasn't so concentrated, but Arl was there to cut apart the flanking attacks. Would have been nice to make a plan, but they're doing pretty much what I would have told them. We need to go for the heavies hard and fast. Stella and Sarah looked to Nathan for direction, and he spent a few more seconds surveying the battlefield before spitting out final commands. Stella, Take everything smaller than the tangles. Whatever will clear this valley the fastest. Go hard. If you're running out of concentrations of undead, start on the farthest off tangle. Sarah, watch for anything dangerous. Champions dangerous monsters. If you can determine the weak points of the statues, go for it. If any of the mages on the wall start to look our way, discourage them. It's time to unleash the dragon's breath, Stella said, light flaring in her eyes as she started channeling a truly impressive amount of magic. The grave tangles can hit you from here, Nathan reminded her. Don't underestimate them, keep your shield strong. Sarah gave him a curt nod. We follow the light in your eyes. Then Nathan was off, darting for the leftmost grave tangle. It was the closest of the giant constructs and his first target. The mass of smaller undead were dangerous, and the statues probably held the sarcophagi of the undead Sklian mages that commanded the whole army. But the grave tangles were the enemies that could crush cities and empower hordes of undead. Even if they took out the leaders, the tangles would still be city-ending threats. As if the thought had prompted them, all three of the huge constructs bellowed as one, dark clefts opening up to release roars that shook the earth and the sky. Waves of dark energy surged outwards from each, sweeping over the battlefield like overlapping shockwaves. Where the energy passed, the undead surged with energy. Nathan slowed down and positioned himself to cover Sarah and Stella. He sent his aura out wide to make a shield and braced himself for the onslaught. He thought about trying to protect Arl and Kachai, but they were too far in front of him. Then the death magic hit. The energy attempted to drain the life out of everything it touched, and the three waves struck like ocean surges. But Nathan's anti-magic was perfectly suited to combat this threat. He stood firm against the tide of magic and prevented more than the barest edge from lapping around his shield to strike his friends. The attack was simplistic, a simple outpouring of death magic. But Nathan could detect a faint wizardry to the magic. It didn't strike at them, but rather sought to twist Davrar itself. If left unchallenged, over time the magic would blight the ground into something incapable of supporting life, and change the ambient mana of Davrar into something that couldn't be used by living mages. Wizards Understanding 9 achieved. Down below, the waves of death clustered around Arl and Kachai, seeking to drown their light in darkness and death. But Arl stood close to Kachai, guarding the wolfman as he fell to his knees and raised his arms to the heavens. His aura compressed under the pressure of the dark magic. He was definitely saying something, but Nathan couldn't hear it over the roars of the grave tangles. Then he could. Kachai's voice boomed out impossibly loudly across the entire battlefield as he finished his prayer, the words cutting through the bone-shaking roars like a knife. By my power, your evil is ended. He shone like a sudden star, rays of light stabbing outwards and vaporizing hundreds, thousands of undead. Chapter 18 Liches. Lament. Kachai's power had broken the grave tangle's onslaught of death magic, but it had also drawn the attention of the undead army. Every undead on the field pivoted towards the heirs, and Nathan caught sight of one of the tallest statues, carved to look like a wise old man, gesturing towards them with a staff made from a snake skeleton 100 yards long. Nathan hurriedly retracted his aura to avoid interfering with Stella's attack. She'd taken the time he'd provided to charge a lightning capacitor, and now fired a small laser into the center of the army. It impacted the chest of one of the closer statues, doing nothing but blackening the stone on the 60-foot statue of a cobra with its hood flared. The lightning that followed close behind did more than that, shattering the top third of the statue in an explosion of dark magic. But the lightning didn't end there, instead scything through every undead near the initial target zone as the raging electricity sought ground. Farther down, Arl lashed out with giant swings of multiple weapons, cleaving through the press of undead as Kachai got back to his feet and began moving forward once more. The wolfman was glowing so brightly he was hard to look at, every piece of exposed fur standing on end and shining like fiber-optic filaments. Nathan accelerated forwards once more. He reacquired the leftmost grave tangle as his target and beelined straight towards it. His aura billowed out as he used it to absorb the death magic from the undead below him. Many of them were humanoid and collapsed like puppets with cut strings, but some were monsters who put up more of a resistance. A herd of undead Nindine leapt at him, using the absurd jumps they'd had in life to attack instead of flee. He dodged the swarm of deer-like creatures and used his aura to swat them from the air. My real role here is tank. I can take the hits better than my allies, and every moment they're defending themselves is one they're not killing the undead. He burned focus and used his skills to draw the attention of the entire battlefield, slowing his progress to get the enemies to stare at him and the circle of unmoving bodies below him. The statue of the old man shifted its staff to point directly at Nathan. Visibility Control 4 achieved. Nice. It helps that I'm flying and clearing a void in this cloud of dark magic. The nearest grave tangle drew back a fleshy appendage, and that's all the warning Nathan had before a whip of undead flesh snapped towards him faster than the speed of sound. The instant was enough to dodge that strike, along with the next two. Effortless dodge 10 achieved. An explosive bullet struck one of the smaller statues in the chest and blew its torso apart, as a second torrent of lightning surged past to ground itself in another part of the army. The first lightning bolt was still going, playing around the battlefield like a scribbling finger and leaving blackened corpses in its wake. Magical attacks flew at Nathan from the statues, and he ignored them almost contemptuously. He was focused on watching for more strikes from the grave tangles. He would survive a hit, but it would probably fling him into the distance long enough for the enemies to focus on his teammates. For now, he focused on tagging each strike with his anti-magic, seeking to weaken the death magic that held the rubbery flesh together as it cracked past at supersonic speeds. The problem was he wasn't making much progress. The strikes forced him to dodge back and forth, preventing him from moving forward. Katja and Arl were significantly ahead of him now, closing on the cluster of statues that seemed to be commanding the undead horde. Nathan's split attention cost him. One of the whip attacks clipped him, tearing off his left leg and sending him crashing into the ground. He bounced like a stone, splattering through ranks of zombies before coming to a stop with a groan. His focus meant he wasn't disoriented, and he leapt upwards with his remaining leg before the undead around him could bury him under their weight. Broken bones snapped back into place all across his body as he looked back over the battlefield. The giant statues had deployed some kind of shield against Stella's attack, but it didn't protect the rest of the army, or reach all the way to the ground. Arl and Katja were battling their way underneath the magical barrier. It looked like they were fighting some kind of honor guard, snake people dressed head to tail in bronze armor and armed with long pikes that shimmered with deadly magic. The disciplined formation swept forward to stop Arl and Katja's advance. 3 of the honor guard fell to headshots in the time it took to take a breath, and Arl swept into the gap in the lines, greatswords whipping out on both sides to bisect 6 more. Then Nathan's attention was drawn back to the grave tangles. One had just unleashed a torrent of greenish liquid towards Stella, and she'd summoned a gale-force wind to blow it back towards the undead army. The liquid hissed where it landed, dissolving flesh and smoking against the soil. 2 lightning capacitors hovered in the sky above her, ice-searing electricity arcing across the plain to ravage through the undead ranks. I need to move faster. Hard to keep dodging without a leg, and it's going to take a minute to regrow. Maybe my stamina can fill the gap and develop acceleration. Nathan envisioned the solid surfaces he pushed off of with his stamina. He tried to make them push him to enable something closer to actual flight. He dumped thousands of stamina into the effort, bracing his arm against the surface. He gritted his teeth and pushed. Nothing happened. Then another tendril lashed out and swatted him from the sky once more. This time it was a direct hit. He plowed into the ground once again, his focus taking a hit as mental vault kept him conscious. He shook his head and recollected his bearings just in time to see 24 zombies throw themselves atop him even as they fell limp in his aura. The stronger ones ripped and tore at him, but he ripped and tore right back, flaring, raging thrill, to toughen his body and give him the strength to dismember the ancient corpses. But more and more undead piled on. Nathan's aura billowed out to drain every locus of death magic in the area, but the pile atop Nathan grew heavier and heavier as larger monsters pushed through his aura to collapse atop the growing mound of flesh. Panic rose and he pushed it back. He would not suffocate. He was buried, but he could dig his way out. He would survive and escape if an entire mountain of undead were piled atop him. He just hoped the heirs could handle themselves while he was incapacitated. At least it'll give me the seconds I need to regrow my leg and heal from all the broken bones of that last hit. He tried to dig his way out, but it was hard to make progress with so many broken bones and with only one functional leg. The other one was growing back quickly, but it wasn't ready yet. 20 seconds passed as he struggled to burrow his way upwards. He kept his eyes and mouth closed and desperately wished that his aura would let him burrow through undead flesh as it had through the wizardry-conjured stone of the academy. God damn, this is gross. I'm going to need to shower under a fire hose after this. Nathan felt a huge concentration of mana arcing towards his position and pulled his aura back as quickly as he could. The pile of undead atop him was blasted apart as Stella's spell landed. A good third of the corpses incinerated as the rest were blasted in all directions. Semi-magical flame and plasma played over him, burning away most of the gunk and the top few layers of his skin. Maybe not. I've never taken a flame bath before, unless you count fireballs. Taken a lot of those. He leapt up into the open air with his good leg, immediately redirecting himself towards the grave tangle. He could feel its influence with his magical senses, pressing against him like a filthy rag against skin. The monster had flowed down the mountain to get closer to Stella and Sarah. They had retreated in turn to stay out of the range of its whipped tentacles. Kachai's light shone from amidst the giant statues, but Nathan couldn't see either of the guys through the press of monsters. All three of the monstrosities bellowed again, and Nathan wasn't in the right spot to interpose himself to block the attack this time. He made a split-second decision to trust his team and moved towards the nearest grave tangle, gritting his teeth as the feeling of corruption intensified. He'd just been buried beneath thousands of pounds of decayed flesh, and it hadn't even felt like this. The hill-sized undead paused in their advance to refocus on him. Nathan's eyes flickered around to plot ways to dodge. His right leg was usable but not completely functional yet, so his mobility would be limited for the next couple of seconds. But the grave tangles seemed to be avoiding any strikes that would hit their own army. So Nathan dropped back out of the sky, feeling the wind and deafening crack of another tendril passing overhead. This part of the army was composed of giant undead snakes. Hundreds of them reared up as Nathan came into striking range. Some of them were recognizably ash-blood cobras, but that was just the start, with dozens of varieties ranging from snakes the size of a normal python all the way up to a black-scaled juggernaut that could have swallowed a train. Not all of them could hiss, but they all tried. Then they struck. Energized by the death magic rushing out from the grave tangles, they were just as fast as they'd been in life. Nathan dodged through a dozen snake strikes in as many seconds, passing through a forest of scaly trunks. He bounced off the sky, ground and the undead like a high-scoring pinball. The colossal black-scaled snake struck for him, but Nathan juked to the side and bounced off the nose of a tree-sized viper that was obliterated a moment later by the larger snake. Parkour 8 achieved. Then he was through the far side of the army and closing on the first grave tangle, finally able to see the source of the putrid magic. It was lit by the reddish glow of flames, but Nathan didn't look back to see what was casting the light. Instead, he reached out with his aura to wrestle with the monster before him. A trio of skeletal snake heads reared up from the top of the monster and sprayed acid in his direction. But he'd been expecting the attack, and his aura wrapped around each of the heads, boiling away the acid as it was conjured. The heads themselves slumped as Nathan drained the magic animating them. The grave tangle opened a huge maw in its bulk, a cavern-sized opening lined with car-sized teeth. It lurched forwards to swallow Nathan, and he let it. Instead of backpedaling, he dove deep inside the creature, aiming for the very center of the giant mound of animated flesh and spreading his aura wide. Let's find out what makes you tick and break it. The jaws snapped shut on Nathan with surprising force given that he was far, far past its teeth. There was no throat, no digestive system, just a solid mass of flesh that made up the monster. Shards of bones and rough cartilage ground against Nathan, and he felt the pressure bend his ribs. On second thought, maybe this was a bad idea. Oh well, no way out but through. He kept his aura in tight, rendering the flesh around him immobile and lessening the immediate pressure as he spent stamina to replace oxygen. Then he scanned around with his magical senses to figure out what was going on with the grave tangle. He was already draining an enormous amount of the death magic that made the monster tick, but it kept dumping it into the immediate area in an attempt to drown him with the cloying darkness. There was nothing critical like he'd been expecting, no core of the monster that he could target. It was just solid flesh and bone from end to end, all of it boiling with tainted magic and wizardry. The wizardry was more concentrated than outside, seemingly permeating the flesh of the entire monster. It wasn't attacking Nathan in any way, but inside the grave tangle the rules of Davrar were different. Death and darkness flowed out of the fabric of Davrar to power the monstrosity, and the grave tangle used that magic with abandon to press in on Nathan from all sides as well as hurl attacks at his allies. I can't drain it dry. It's drawing magic out of nowhere, like Kachai does for his rituals. But this isn't divine mana, it's the source of that corruption I felt earlier. If the grave tangles had their way, all of the land would be covered in this filth. Nathan spent a moment longer studying the nature of the wizardry all around him. It was different than anything he'd experienced before, but he had the tools to figure it out. Even if being crushed and suffocated inside a giant undead isn't the ideal study environment, it took a moment for everything to snap into place. This wasn't like a mana pool, a construct of wizardry that let a mage accumulate a pool of power ready to do their bidding. This was more like a permanent version of one of the spells Badad had cast, something that rewrote the rules of reality in an area. In this case, it made it natural for dark magic to seep out of the world and use that power to sustain itself. Wizard's understanding 10 achieved. Now he knew what was going on, he just had to figure out how to stop it. That was easier said than done. He had half of the solution but needed the other half. He needed some way to figure out how he could use his anti-magic to break this new style of wizardry. He burned focus and thought hard about different avenues of attack, modeling different strategies, and trying them out as quickly as he could. Spreading out his aura allowed the grave tangle to press in on him harder, but he was absorbing so much mana that it was trivial to push back against the pressure with muscle and healing. He started with a drill-like structure but quickly diversified, trying something closer to a spiral before venturing into more distant space, watching how the wizardry retracted slightly when he poked it with a concentrated spike of anti-magic. But it wasn't being absorbed, merely drawing back from his attack. He didn't have enough anti-magic to blanket even a tenth of the monster with that kind of density. He poked again and felt the wizardry retract again before it had fully finished recovering from his first poke. Then he poked it somewhere else, and the wizardry withdrew there too, colliding with itself in a turbulent magical cascade. He concentrated on that turbulence, trying to feel how the wizardry reacted to being pressed into such a tight space. Wizard's Detection 7 achieved. Aha. I think I got you. I'm glad I think well under pressure. Chapter 19, Resolving the Intractable. Buried inside the giant body of the grave tangle, Nathan smiled, then immediately regretted it as he tasted the faintest amount of rancid flesh. But the joy was real. He had his tool, now he just needed to figure out how to apply it. He planned out the most effective way to use his aura to encourage the destructive turbulence he felt. So far he destroyed the smallest part of the wizardry that was the source of the grave tangle's magic. Now he needed to get the rest of it. He gave the wizardry a few more exploratory pokes, refining his strategy as he went until he thought it would work. Wizard's Meditation 9 achieved. Then he unleashed his anti-magic, reserving only the smallest portion to defend himself as the rest of it lanced out in dozens of rapid-fire stabs that caused the wizardry to retract away, only to run into another ripple of wizardry. He built the interference until it turned destructive, and the overlapping waves canceled each other out. It was a bit like manually controlling noise-canceling headphones, and only possible because of the large size of the grave tangle and the slow propagation speed of the wizardry. Congratulations! You have developed the high-tier Aura Manipulation 10 utility skill into Aura Control. Utility skill: Aura Control. Your aura moves according to your will. The process immediately became easier. Nathan's aura moved instinctively, as if it had been honed by years of training. He canceled the wizardry in a larger and larger area, feeling gleeful as the amount of dark magic flowing into the world dropped dramatically. There was a positive feedback loop between the corruptive mana and the wizardry, and now Nathan was attacking both sides of that loop. The grave tangle didn't seem to notice what Nathan was doing. It certainly didn't try anything new to kill him as the magic drained away, and the crushing pressure went with it. Nathan used the break to extend his assault outward, scouring the wizardry and dark magic from the internals of the giant undead monstrosity. He could feel it slowing down through his magical senses, the attacks growing sluggish and its forward progress slowing. There was a tipping point, a moment when Nathan's influence overwhelmed that of the creature. He drained the last of the magic from the colossal undead and broke the wizardry that generated more. The monster stopped moving and lost cohesion. What had been a unified mass of flesh and bone became a loose heap, held together by nothing at all. It fell apart, slumping down as the mound structure couldn't support its own weight anymore. Arcane Nullfield 7 achieved. Nathan burst out of the collapsing pile of rotting flesh and into the air. He gained some height and wiped the worst of the gore from his face before taking a breath and looking around. The grave tangle had carried him into the center of the army, though there wasn't all that much left of it. The ground around Nathan was blackened and scorched, with fires burning amongst piled corpses. Scattered undead wandered here and there, but this section of the army seemed to have been destroyed by excessive amounts of fire and lightning. Stella was hard to miss. She hovered in the distance, haloed in crackling light. 3 of the spherical lightning capacitors hovered around her, each spitting out a continuous stream of lightning to wipe out any undead that caught her notice. Then she lifted a hand and flame sparked in her palm, quickly growing into a giant fireball that shot outwards as if fired from a cannon. It impacted a sparse crowd of zombies in a spray of flame. Nathan could feel the heat on his face from here. Damn, she really cut loose. Good thing there's nothing here we need to protect. The walls of Argeless were awash with flames, the mages likely deciding that now was the time to burn all of their mana to drive away the undead who had gotten close. Likely they didn't want Stella to aim any of her spells anywhere close to them. Nathan turned to study the rest of the battlefield, seeing that every single one of the mobile statues had been destroyed. There was still a phalanx of the bronze-armored Naga soldiers, but Aura was cutting through them efficiently. Beyond that were the remaining 2 grave tangles. Kachai battled the nearer one, his shield enhanced with divine light to block a ground-shattering blow from one of the tentacles. A snakehead reared back to spray acid and then fell off the neck as a bullet shattered one of the exposed vertebrae. The grave tangle reared back to roar out dark magic, and Kachai roared back his own defiance. Golden light surged forward to meet the black shockwave, pushing the death mana back. The 3rd grave tangle had been the most distant, and it surged forward to join the fight, occasionally striking out from long distance to aid its compatriot. I think that's my target. Kachai seems to be winning his fight. Nathan set his sights on the 3rd tangle and sped up, rushing across the battlefield. It looked like his allies had the rest of this stuff handled. All he had to do was kill another of the most terrifying enemies on the field. He passed somewhat close to Kachai's fight with his own grave tangle and felt immense quantities of mana warring back and forth. Kachai had clearly invoked even more power, and golden mana surged out of nowhere to battle against the corruptive influence of the grave tangle. He's not winning easily, but I think he'll take it. Davra rewards risk, and if I intervene, it'll prevent him from earning levels and developing his skills and talents. Nathan flew overhead at highway speeds, rapidly closing on the 3rd and last grave tangle. He dodged the attacks it sent his way without trouble. It seemed distracted, rapidly covering ground to join its peer. Nathan wasn't going to let it. Now let's see if I can take it down without diving inside. That was unpleasant. He came to a stop just above the tangle. A few enormous pincer-like arms of chitin unfolded from the beast and swung up towards him. He severed their connection to the main body with precise lashes of antimagic, noting that the mana-generating wizardry only extended to the main body. Then he set to work repeating his feat from before. His aura lanced out in a coordinated pattern, setting up destructive ripples in the wizardry while draining away the dark magic suffusing the flesh. His new skill let him extend his aura further and keep it more coherent, and he didn't have to approach within 30 feet of the hill-sized abomination to reach all the way through it with a spear of concentrated antimagic. Aura Control 2 achieved. The monster continued to try and attack him, but he dodged and disabled every method it attempted. It didn't seem to have the snake heads of the others, instead relying on the whip-like tentacles and giant insectoid limbs. But Nathan was too close for the whips, and he disabled everything else the moment it left the central body of the grave tangle. The monstrous undead kept moving towards where Kachai fought its fellow. It was slowing down, struggling to keep its body together with limited mana, and Nathan had a thought. He looked down at the enormous sluggish undead, then over towards where Stella hovered. She continued to bathe sections of the battlefield in destructive magic, even though all that was left was scattered individual undead. Some of those undead were definitely dangerous, but they no longer faced a cohesive army. Nathan cupped his hands in front of his mouth and waited for a gap in between the grave tangle's roars. Then he yelled as loud as he could, sending stamina directly to his lungs and vocal cords. "Stella, kill this one." His words sounded over the crackle of lightning, over the booms of Kachai's battle against his own foe. "Congratulations, you have developed the mid-tier battle cry, utility skill into high-tier battle cry. Utility skill, high-tier battle cry. Your cries will be more intimidating and be significantly more audible across the din of battle." The sustained bolts of lightning cut out a moment later, though the crackling orbs that produced them stayed. They grew brighter in intensity as Stella crafted a broad cylinder of reflective mana, aiming one end at the grave tangle underneath Nathan. He took in the size of the cylinder, then the three capacitor spheres that continued to ramp up in intensity. Then he looked down at the slowly moving monstrosity barely 30 feet below him. Uh-oh. He started climbing into the sky, gaining distance from his enemy. It became harder to counter the grave tangle's attacks, but it was moving sluggishly. And he didn't want to be right next to the thing when Stella finally finished her spell. Kacha won his own battle first. He raised his hammer towards the sky as his words shook the battlefield. By my own sacred light, I denounce you. Your very existence is the truest blasphemy. I declare you anathema. With the last word, he brought down his hammer on empty air. His power surged forward to mirror the action, a furious mass of divine magic crashing down upon the grave tangle like the fist of an angry god. Under some interpretations, that's exactly what it is. The grave tangle was crushed by the blow, parts of the monster spraying outwards in all directions. Nathan could feel its magic flickering from here. It tried to restore its shape, more magic blooming forth to empower the monster. But Kachai didn't give it the chance, bringing down his power again and again to bludgeon the monster into submission. The divine power burned away the dark magic and left it as a misshapen and somewhat pancaked mass of flesh. Nathan's only warning that Stella was about to fire was a spark of light, as she connected her lightning capacitors to her giant lasing tube. A beam of light stretched across the battlefield to connect her to the grave tangle with a crack of ionization, and the laser bored into the massive monster with the angry roar of escaping steam. Then, she unshackled her lightning. She didn't use the same lightning bolts that had scoured the battlefield clean. She emptied all 3 lightning capacitors into the grave tangle over the span of a second, unleashing a truly stupendous amount of power in a moment. There was no pause, no moment where the huge undead tried to contest her power. It simply exploded into a mist of vaporized flesh. Nathan was blasted into the sky and pelted by high-velocity shrapnel that had once been the body of the enormous monster. A piece of bone stabbed into his leg, lodging in his leg where the heat of it started to cook his calf. He reached down and grabbed the offending projectile, yanking it out and scorching his fingers on the red-hot surface. He looked down to see the merrily burning crater where the 3rd grave tangle had once been. Damn! The heirs convened on Kachai, who'd taken a knee atop the hill he'd been fighting from. The clouds overhead had broken, and a sunbeam shone straight down to illuminate the wolfman's pristine armor. He seemed exhausted, fur slicked with sweat and panting hard. But his mouth was stretched in a pleased grin as he looked over the carnage of the battlefield. He glanced around as the heirs approached, checking over each one for injuries and merely rolling his eyes when he saw that Nathan was nude and covered with gore. Is his fur a shade lighter? I think it might be. Nathan was going to ask Arl for a new set of clothes as the fighter approached, but then Arl collapsed onto the ground. Nathan opened his mouth to tell Kachai, but the wolfman was already on it. He blazed down the hill, carried upon divine magic. The other heirs followed. Sarah pulled up last and watched with a tight expression as Kachai turned Arl over gently to reveal a stab wound in his side. It didn't look particularly large, but at Kachai's prodding touch, the armor pulled away to reveal necrosis spreading across Arl's bronzed body. It covered half of his chest already. The fighter's breathing stuttered, and out of the corner of Nathan's eye, he saw Stella lay a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. Kachai's got this. It's his whole shtick. The shield of hope raised both hands high over Arl's prone form and spoke. His voice didn't crack the heavens, but it did reverberate as if there were multiple speakers. Together we have slain a foul army in righteous battle to protect the innocent. Through my divine power, that deed shall be repaid. Rise, restored by the sacred light and ready to give battle once more. The sunbeam concentrated down on Arl as power flowed into him from Kachai. The rotting flesh was wiped away like a stain cleaned with a cloth, and the puncture wound in the center healed over in a moment. Arl's eyes snapped open and he breathed out an exaggerated breath, sitting up as his armor flowed down to cover his torso and expose his head. He looked over at Kachai. The wolfman was on hands and knees, panting with his head down. That hard of a target. I didn't think it was so bad. When Kachai didn't raise his head, Arl merely reached out and punched him in the shoulder lightly, then stood and offered him a hand. By the dawn's light, thank you. Now don't we have a city to deal with? Kachai allowed Arl to pull him upright. He remained haggard but gestured in the direction of Argles. The rest of you should go deal with that. I need a moment. Sarah rushed in to hug her brother, bandolier clanking against his armor. Don't bait the castle bear. You should have stayed distant. He smirked at her, and yield to the leaders of the army. Never. Besides, I picked up this. He dumped a wicked trident out of his bag, the tip smoking with dark magic. It's what got me. Nathan, he looked around, seemingly noticing Nathan's state of undress. He sighed and pulled out some rags and a fresh set of clothes. Here, priorities. Can't have you freeing a city looking like that. Or smelling either, Stella said, wrinkling her nose. Nathan rolled his eyes. I think that's the battlefield in general, actually. Can I get some water, too? He cleaned up with the rags and some help from a dimensional waterskin as the rest of the heirs looked around the battlefield. Do we need to kill the rest of the undead? Sarah shrugged. There's nothing too powerful left. We should probably deal with what we can, but they don't pose a threat to Argles anymore. But they might prevent anybody from going to Giant's Rest for a while, Stella pointed out, looking around at the shambling undead stretching into the distance. All right, Sarah said with a sigh. Let's see who can get more, then meet back here and figure out what to do about Argles. Do you think they'll attack us? Arl asked, looking towards the city. It was surrounded by burning piles of undead that sent pillars of smoke into the sky. Nathan focused on the distant city walls as he idly checked over the trident Arl had looted from the undead champion. He could see people atop those walls looking right back. Many in the red robes of Giant's Rest war mages. They looked exhausted. He smirked. No, they're more tired than we are, and we're the ones who just beat 3 grave tangles and blew one of them to smithereens. He raised an eyebrow at Stella. She looked proud, raising her chin and wordlessly daring him to criticize. Let's end this blasphemous fight, Sarah said, already rising into the air. Before they scatter. The air split up, each hunting the undead in their own way. Kachai rested atop the hill where the sun continued to shine down upon him. Nathan ran through the sky, spearing undead with his aura and draining the magic that animated them. Stella threw fireballs, lightning bolts and lasers, switching off without any real pattern. Arl moved slower than usual, casually hacking any undead he found into pieces, and Sarah's rifle boomed, shattering the skulls of the far-distant undead. They were greeted with a level-up notification as they reconvened. Void of Magic has leveled to 694. You and your party have destroyed the ancient Legion of Andames, the Shadowed Coil. They will never again trouble the sands of Skleas. Who got the big guy? Nathan asked. Arl raised his hand. The one with the staff. Chapter 20. Escaping the wind. Nathan kept an eye on the walls of Argles while he chatted with his friends about the battle. There were a number of mages watching them. If somebody had exceptional aim, they might have been able to hit Sarah or Arl with a disintegrate, but Nathan wasn't actually that worried. They just watched the heirs dismantle an entire army of undead, though Stella got most of the horde. Anybody with 2 brain cells to rub together probably knew that Nathan was here, and that he'd single-handedly killed several archmages and battered back in Giant's Rest. The mages in Argles were probably hoping that the heirs would turn around and leave now that the army was destroyed. Sarah fired one more shot, dropping a final undead before her rifle disappeared into its dimensional pouch. I think this target is dead. The sunlight had spread from the single beam illuminating Kacha to a large swath of light across the field of corpses. The piles of the dead didn't look so monstrous in the light. They simply looked dead. Kachai slowly got to his feet. He still looked tired but not absolutely exhausted. His eyes tracked to Argles. "Shall we conquer this city? I am spent, but they are just as tired. The rest of you are fit to fight." "What are we doing with the mages?" Sarah said with a frown. "There are a lot of war mages over there. I'll tell them we're freeing all of their slaves," Nathan replied. "Some of them will probably attack us and we'll kill them. Then we tell the ones who are left that Hibril is joining the new administration of Giant's Rest and ask if they want to follow him." "Do we worry they will attempt to take over in Giant's Rest?" Stella asked with a cocked eyebrow. Nathan shrugged. "We can imply that we'll be around to correct them if they have any lapses. They're scared of me." That should buy Mila enough time to get them used to a new normal and to put in contingencies. There's also the anti-mages. I wouldn't put them up against any archmages, but together they should be able to take out some rogue war mages. Arl was inspecting his new trident, seeming somewhat detached from the conversation. "Okay, let's go do it. Nathan, you're blazing the path." "Sure," he said, and they set off towards the city on foot, climbing over piles of undead. The mages atop the wall were visibly nervous as the heirs approached, but none of them did anything but watch. When Nathan was about 50 feet away from the main gate, he stopped and pitched his voice to carry to every mage on the wall facing them. "You are mages of Giant's Rest, but Giant's Rest is no more. The Academy has fallen, most of the archmages are dead. Badud is dead, and the founders have forsaken you. It's time for you to make a choice. You can die with Giant's Rest or be part of something new. But either way, I'm going to free every slave in Argles and send them to Giant's Rest." He paused a beat, eyes flicking across the forces arrayed on the walls before him. There were a dozen or so war mages, mostly older men, but a few were on the younger side and there were 2 women. Then there were nearly 50 green-robed enslavement mages and a score of artisan mages. They were flanked by an equal number of slave elites, all of them with weapons slick with gore. One of the older war mages snarled, then raised his hand. "You'll burn." Grand fireball, a dozen more mages joined in the attack, throwing various elemental attacks towards the heirs. All of them evaporated like a flurry of snow in the blast furnace of Nathan's aura, and he punched out thin spears of anti-magic to break the mage armor spells of every attacking mage at once. Aura Control 3 achieved. "Sarah," he said, phrasing it as a request. Pistols appeared in both of the sniperess hands. Each roared with flame as she shot the mages that had attacked. Most of them were clean headshots, but a few were hit in the neck, and one got his ear blown off before a follow-up shot got him through the eye. Spellslayer has leveled to 488. You have stripped the defenses from a dozen mages so your ally could kill them. The cloud of gunsmoke cleared, and Nathan looked up at the remaining mages. They were all recoiling from the falling bodies, but weren't in a hurry to go on the offensive. 7 of the war mages were still alive, and he met their gazes levelly. "Hibril Dho Banas has surrendered. He's working with the freed slaves to build something new. You can be part of that, you don't have to die here. My enemy is slavers, not all mages." Nobody responded immediately, and he gave them a beat to exchange worried glances before continuing. "But things will change. Your slaves will be free. Giant's Rest is gone, and if you attempt to recreate it." He let loose a loud growl, making it clear what his reaction would be to anybody foolish enough to try that. High-tier battle cry 2 achieved. "Now, can somebody open this ending's damned gate?" One of the war mages cast a quick spell, and the gate swung open before them. Nathan and the heirs marched into the city of Argles, heads held high. "Pretty different from how we entered Housemate, isn't it? Void of Magic has leveled to 707. You have subjugated the city of Argles." It took almost a day, and Nathan had to hunt down a few mages who tried to hide within the city. He'd used his magical senses to find mages from a distance before, but it was still a challenge to scour an entire city. The smarter ones didn't cast any magic, requiring him to pick out their mana pools from the ambient magic left over from the siege. Wizard's detection 8 achieved. He didn't kill them, just sending the artisans onwards with a warning and stripping the war mages of their magic. Void of Magic has leveled to 709. You have chased down several war mages of Giant's Rest who tried to escape your judgment. He had several strained conversations with Mila about the logistics and security of another group of mages and ex-slaves arriving in Giant's Rest. But eventually, Nathan felt comfortable leaving Arglas. He was very aware that every moment they delayed was another moment that assassins could be catching up to them. In the end, they left without fanfare, telling the few people who saw them go that they were going to eliminate some nearby monster nests. Then they headed west. They quickly lost sight of Arglas in the foothills of the mountains and paused to debate exactly where they were going next. Housemate, Arl proposed. It would be nice to see what occurs in that city. Stella shrugged, unenthused. Most of the people we know from Housemate are in Giant's Rest now. Mila the antimages, most of the elites. The smart assassins may be lying in wait there. Sarah's face was shadowed as she looked down, inspecting her revolvers for the dozenth time. All those we need to see are in Gemor. We should cut straight through the mountains. Won't the assassins be in Gemor too? Stella asked with a tilt of her head. Yes, but it is a harder city for outsiders, and there are more adventurers in the streets, Sarah replied. Hear me, but it's also the only city we need to go to. They're in Litcliffe. She shot a look towards Nathan, where the assassins will be as thick as constructs in a fortress foundry. Right, Nathan said. Sounds good. That reminds me of something I need to figure out. Namely, what final insights do I give to Sudriel and the crafters? I told them no artillery before, but I'm wondering if I should relax that restriction with the ending on its way. 100 years is about enough time for them to properly integrate industrial insights. Stella grimaced. I would rather take up hydra farming than tell my parents I'm leaving the continent. Ha! As they traveled into the mountains, Nathan thought about Gemor and the advance of technology. When he'd last left Gemor, he'd laid some restrictions on Beetrid, Poppy, and Herden to prevent them developing certain kinds of technology with the insights he'd given them. He'd primarily been worried about Giant's Rest gaining access to mass-produced rifles for their slave soldiers, as well as artillery to supplement their mages. He'd also wanted to prevent Gemor from going down the same path that Earth had, with industrialization reshaping the world in ways both great and terrible. He'd been afraid of machine guns that would let a single fighter mow down hundreds of people, or artillery that would be used to level cities. But that had been before he saw the Questers in action, or the unleashed power of the war mages of Giant's Rest. There were already ways on Davrar to be extremely efficient at killing, as well as things that demanded that much firepower to kill. Just look at the army we just fought. Thousands of smaller monsters and a couple enormous ones. I don't think an artillery barrage would be overkill for a grave tangle. They're slow-moving but dangerous to almost anybody who can see them. So artillery would actually be a perfect counter if you didn't have an elite adventurer on standby. The more Nathan thought about it, the more he was starting to change his mind on his technology restrictions. Giant's Rest was gone, so he didn't have to worry about them benefiting. And while spreading insights for regeneration and anti-magic would help individuals be better fighters, spreading insights of industry would help Gemor as a whole fight better. In fact, it's probably better for Gemor's development. An elite adventurer does not in principle require a civilization to support them. They can be a nation unto themselves, killing without consequence unless somebody stronger can bring them to heel. They're not really incentivized to keep civilization around for practical reasons, just emotional ones. But if those same adventurers needed ammunition or repairs of industrialized weapons, then they'd require the support of civilization. Additionally, the very nature of the weapons almost inclined themselves towards teamwork. It was hard to be a lone murder hobo when your weapon was an artillery piece. It was also inarguable that Gemor had enemies deserving of that kind of firepower. Not only were there thousands of dungeons still on the surface of Gemor, but Badad had hinted that there were more below ground and hidden in the sky. That was not a particularly pleasant thought, and even if I prevent the ending of history, all of those dungeons still need to be cleared, even if that means hitting them with a few £1,000 of explosives from 10 miles away. Honestly, that's probably a pretty good way to do it. The heirs had threaded their way past dozens of dungeons in the deep mountains and were making camp on a sheltered ledge. Nathan let out a heavy sigh as he considered the dilemma before him. He just convinced himself to provide Gemor with more insights, and now was the time to plan that out. He noticed Sarah shooting him a curious look. Nathan raised an eyebrow at her. She shrugged. "You're done with Giant's Rest. Enjoy that victory for a moment instead of looking ahead to the next target. The questers are far away. We have a sea trip ahead of us first." Then she frowned. "And our parents. The Caxals are the worst, but Dad won't want us to leave the continent either." Nathan shook his head. "That's not it. I'm thinking about what insights to give Gemor before I go. Not just the Adventurer Archive, but also the Crafters. I'm going to open up the manufacturing of guns, and I'm trying to decide how much more to give them." Arl joined the conversation. "They're already in your debt." "How much more could you get from them?" He paused. "How much more could you give?" "I'm not sure," Nathan replied. "Some of it might not translate well to Davrar with magic and skills, but other parts might be pretty trivial to accomplish here with the right enchantments. I'm pretty sure a tank would be a death trap, but they might be able to make airships pretty easily. Stella's shown that air magic can separate out atmospheric gases pretty easily." His mind ran through the history of chemical industrialization as he considered what to try and give Gemor. Nathan blew air out of his cheeks, eyes going distant as he considered the implications of the magic Stella had developed. Arl and Sarah exchanged an amused look and went back to preparing the camp as Nathan mused on the potential of magic in industrialization. He hadn't previously been interested in trying to build up an industrial base in Gemor. He'd thought it would lead to bad things. But that had been before he'd understood the skills of the crafters and the potential of enchantments. Magic can extract pure oxygen from air. Presumably, it can do other purifications similarly. That changes everything. I laid out the Bessemer process to Beatrid, but you could easily revolutionize steelmaking by bubbling pure oxygen into the smelter instead of straight atmospheric gas. And all that would take is an enchantment on the intake pipe. His eyes went wide at the possibilities as they unfolded inside his mind's eye. He'd always been interested in the science of industrialization, even if most of the implementation was outside of his grasp. Heat enchantments can almost certainly reach the temperatures required for the Haber process, though they'd need a source of methane. Natural gas probably isn't an option on Davrar. Electrolyze water to make hydrogen, then use the Sabatier process to make methane from carbon dioxide. It's probably easier to turn charcoal into methane with gasification. All you need is heat, pressure, and a little bit of oxygen. Or hell, they could do gas separation of the air coming out of the sewers. But once they have bulk ammonia, then you can get nitric acid with just heat, oxygen, and water. And then you can make ammonium nitrate by mixing in additional ammonium. Great for gunpowder production. Or just apply the nitric acid to cloth or other organics for more complex explosives from dynamite to gun con. He internally shrugged. eyes tracking to Stella as he thought. If this was going to work, he'd need to get her to write down some of the insights she'd figured out to facilitate gas separation. He'd need to give the Gemor crafters a crash course on the periodic table of elements, basic chemistry, and the reactions that would be most useful to them. All of the heirs were looking at Nathan now, though their faces were more resigned than wary. This was hardly the first time he'd gone off on a train of thought, and they were all waiting for him to return and share his insights. But Nathan's gaze went past the rest of them to Kachai, who was watching Nathan with a guarded expression. "I'm not sure if I've just convinced myself this is a good idea just yet. I decided not to do this before, so I should be careful before I change my mind. This is a huge decision, even if it's the right one." "Kachai." He turned to face his teammate, setting his shoulders. The wolfman returned the address with a questioning tone. "Nathan, before we left Gemor, I decided to withhold many insights from your crafters, insights that rule my world." He paused, trying to figure out how to communicate the immensity of what he was considering. Insights that let us convert one thing into another, to make nearly infinite amounts of things we need, including weapons and explosives. He gestured towards Sarah's weapons, but there was a price. A lot of these processes make toxic byproducts, and the factories where they happened were not good places to work. He chewed on his lip. "I held the insights back because I was afraid of Giant's Rest stealing them, and because I didn't understand the capabilities of your crafters or the potential of magic to overcome a lot of the problems. Now I'm thinking of turning over those insights. But can you help me decide?" Kacha met Nathan's eyes squarely, gold looking into blue as he considered the question. They were interrupted by a shaky breath coming from the side, looking over to see Arl sitting down as he watched with wide eyes. "This is it, isn't it?" He gestured out over the desolate mountains all around them, lit by the night sky overhead. "Where you two decide the future of Gemor, if it develops like Earth did or on its own." Thank you for listening to the story on KevinAudio.com. Chapter 21, Hefty Decisions. Kacha regarded Nathan squarely, considering the question of industrialization. "You speak of these dangers from the past. Are they in your past or the distant past of Earth? Is it possible to do this alchemy without it burning those who use it?" Nathan tilted his head from side to side before answering hesitantly. "Yes, it's possible. But every time, over and over, the harm was done first, and only then did we figure out how to prevent it. People died, lots of people, before things got better, and it's still not perfect. It's easier and cheaper to do it without being safe. The same thing with the toxins. We killed whole ecosystems and poisoned a generation with lead. We banned whole categories of weapons that are too inhumane to use." Nathan had to stop and take a breath. He was working himself up into a frenzy. "Weapons too inhumane for use against people. Your world has no monsters," Kacha replied. "Every weapon is to be grasped so long as it does not harm the wielder if you would share them." "Can we trust people with every weapon?" Nathan asked, gesturing to Stella. "It's like the insights I refuse to teach Stella. They'll change everything, and probably not for the better. If every mage can destroy a city, then soon enough there won't be any cities. I want to help people live healthy and safe lives, but I don't want to provide the means for people to wipe each other out." Kachai dipped his head. "But those are not the insights you plan to share. You plan to share deeper insights of technology that will enable our crafters to reach new heights. They will change things, and you wish to ensure the change is positive." Stella spoke in an exasperated voice. "It's already all changing. Giant's Rest falls and Gemor expands, and now an ending is 100 years away. If Gemor doesn't change, it will die, sure and certain." Kacha held out a calming hand. "Would you strip these abilities from your own people? Return Earth to the time before such insights were developed?" Nathan shook his head sharply. "No, they've done too much good, child mortality alone. But I wish it could have been done without so much damage." He'd long been a believer that science and technology were good, but could have terrible consequences if applied irresponsibly. In your world, these insights have done more good than evil, with no warning of the harms, the wolfman said quietly. Do you trust us to act with more care if we are provided warning of the dangers? Nathan broke eye contact with Kachai's intense stare, giving himself space to really dive into that argument. To a large extent, Kachai was correct. Jemor already managed the dangers of Davrar fairly well, and the adventurer training course had hammered home the importance of responsibility, of not waking a dungeon unnecessarily. But now Jemor, and the continent as a whole, faced a terrible danger that he was partially responsible for. He could give them a way to prepare themselves against it, and he was hesitating because he thought they might misuse it. But if he wanted to help Jemor to improve the lives of the people living in his adopted home, then there was little excuse for not sharing. With a sigh, Nathan looked back, reconnecting with Kachai's gaze. It's not that I don't trust you or Jemor, he said softly. I will share many things, but I have a responsibility to balance the good against the potential harm. I could share limited insights like I did with the guns, or I can give Jemor a broader base to build off of. But I don't know which is right. Kachai's golden eyes were kind. This responsibility is not yours alone to bear. If you warn us of the dangers of the insights and still we err, then the fault lies with us. You are not to blame for trusting us. But today, Davrar kills most before they can reach old age. If you wish to change that, if Jemor is to survive and thrive, then I ask that you share your knowledge. Jemor has struggled against Giant's Rest for generations, and now we secure their territory without their insights. Give us the power to fill that void. I've seen the power of your insights, even the dangerous ones, Stella said steadily, following up Kachai's point. They aren't a prophecy of doom. Their power, and power is dangerous, but Jemor has dangerous insights already. The Adventurers Guild exists to control dangerous people, to channel their effort for good. Nathan looked around, seeing the resolve in his friend's eyes. All right, let's talk through this. But remember, this isn't just personal power. It's the power for Jemor to conquer, to destroy, and will be responsible for the consequences. If we come back and find Jemor has become everything Giant's Rest was by using this power, then that will be our fault. Tell it to the council. We don't rule Jemor, Sarah said, sitting down nearby and pulling out some paper she'd looted from Giant's Rest. For now, let's get started. She looked up at him. How long is this going to take? Nathan shrugged. I'm not sure, a few days, Kachai nodded towards him. We can spend some time here. This place is safe from assassins unless they can track us into dungeon-infested mountains and fly. We're still keeping watches, Arl pointed out. Nathan snorted. Thanks. Well, let's get started. Let me draw you a diagram of the basic chemical supply chain, then we can talk about what each thing enables. I want to hear your opinions on what to include. Tutoring 6 achieved. The next day came and went, and they stayed hunkered on their secluded ledge while Nathan discussed the insights he wanted to share with his friends before writing them down. There was more than he'd expected, though his knowledge had some clear holes. He had the entire process for producing nitrate fertilizers written out, with multiple options for many of the steps, but he couldn't remember for the life of him how phosphate fertilizers were made. Perfect memory didn't help if you'd never learned information in the first place. Obviously, it starts with phosphorus, which I think needs to be mined. But what does the ore look like? Can you extract it from manure? I'm not sure. You'd need to oxidize the inorganic phosphorus to phosphate, but I'm not sure how to do that. It might just be sulfuric acid and heat. That's kind of the universal oxidizer in organic chemistry, but I'm not sure it would work for this. Then you'd need to neutralize the acidity, which you could do with ammonium. Is that all that's needed to make diammonium phosphate? The chemistry makes sense, but I don't know the details of how you'd make it work. He shrugged and looked down on his summary of phosphorus fertilizer. He just need to leave a lot of question marks throughout the document. He could at least note down his guesses and make sure to clearly mark it as uncertain. His memory was infallible, but his suppositions were not. Then he passed it off to Arl and picked up a clean sheet for the next topic. They'd spent quite a bit of time outlining the important knowledge, and he scanned down the list for the next topic. It looked like he'd just finished the last part of chemistry. Darn. I like teaching intro chemistry, and I doubt I'll get many more chances to do so. They'd covered the basics, including the periodic table, some basic physical chemistry, including oxidation and reduction. It was basically just the highlights of an undergraduate chemistry textbook with every detail Nathan could remember of the most important reactions: producing sulfuric, nitric, and hydrochloric acid, sodium carbonate, the Haber process, aluminum smelting, and Portland cement. The next topic was metal forging, and after that was steam power, though Nathan had been debating even including steam. The heirs had been fascinated by the idea when he'd explained it, but they didn't expect steam engines to make much of a difference on Davrar, given the prevalence of dimensional enchantments. You didn't need to build a train when a person with a pouch could carry thousands of pounds of goods. Still, Stella had urged him to include it because it might lead to some powerful insights they couldn't imagine. But heat enchantments seem really easy. It might be easier to use steam to convert magic to motion than force enchantments. Somebody will probably figure out an insight to build a steam-powered mech. Beside him, Arl scrutinized the latest paper and then rewrote it on a fresh sheet, cleaning up Nathan's handwriting and the places where he'd scratched out one explanation to write a different one. The resulting product was clean and precise. When Arl was done, he carefully threaded the corner of the paper through a ring so it would be in the proper order. Sarah and Stella were working together to write down the supporting magical insights that Stella had developed. That had started with the details on how to use air magic to separate different gases from each other. But now, she was working on distilling down her electricity insights into something the average mage could understand. They couldn't exactly plan to teach calculus and magnetism to every mage so they could make electrical enchantments. It seemed to be slow going, but Stella thought she could get a weaker version of her own understanding across, something that would be sufficient for enchanting, if not battle. Kachai was keeping watch, meditating on the edge of the ledge overlooking the vista beyond. They'd been attacked shortly after noon by a pack of silver darters, but Stella had chased the venomous birds away with a few gusts of hurricane-strength wind. Some loose notes had been blown away and had to be hunted down, so now everything was being stored in dimensional bags when it wasn't being actively worked on. Nathan frowned down at the sheet of paper with the word "cannons" written at the top. He knew something about American Civil War cannon manufacture, but that wasn't really what Gemor needed. They needed something closer to World War I artillery, weapons able to hurl a large explosive multiple miles and strike an unseen target. But he didn't know how to make such an artillery piece. Start with what you know, then make educated guesses. The Gemor crafters are smart and practical. If they know the basics and the goal, they'll figure it out. I wouldn't be entirely surprised if I come back in 10 years to a bunch of mechs held together with insights and spit. He got back to work. They were done on the afternoon of the third day. Sarah held the tome carefully, looking down at it with something akin to awe. She'd looted a couple of reams of blank paper from Giant's Rest because they were a valuable commodity in Gemor. Most of them had ended up in the book or been used in the various drafting steps, but she hadn't complained. "Well, it's done," she said. "What do we call it?" Arl asked, reaching out a hand to stroke the spine. He'd stitched the cover together out of some spare leather and bound the spine with glue he used to fix clothing. "A book like this needs a name." "The Book of Natural Law," Stella said with a yawn. She'd stayed up late into the night to work on more general versions of the purification spells to see if she could make them work with earth mana for metal as well as air. She'd also tried to distill the full electricity insight down into something that could be understood by regular mages, but hadn't had a lot of success. Nathan considered the name. It was good, but didn't feel quite right to him. The engineer's manual, no, too far in the other direction. He frowned, thinking about what this book was. I think this needs something more classic. Let's call it the Liber Physicae. Kachai scrubbed at his ear. Was that a different language? Yup, Nathan replied. It means physics book, in one of the old languages of Earth, the one usually associated with scholarship in my part of the world. Seems appropriate to me. Sarah voiced her approval. It's a book of Earth knowledge. It should be labeled in an Earth language. Arl asked Nathan to help him emboss the book's name into the cover. When they were done, he examined the strange Latin letters on the surface, sounding them out. Liber Physicae. They're probably going to just call it Nathan's book, or maybe the Book of Insights. There's enough in here for 12 builds and 100 crafters. I can't believe there's a full process to make explosives from air and water. That seems like a dungeon's trick. Nathan chuckled. That's the great thing about science. It doesn't care how you feel, it just works, or doesn't as the case may be. But it's always your fault either way. Stella scrubbed at her eyes. I should send something to my parents. They've been sending me worried message spells all day. I just told them I was busy. She looked around at the heirs and then longingly towards her bedroll. Should we head to Gemor? We could make it by morning. Sarah shook her head. Talking to our parents will be a prophecy of death. Let's do it fully rested. She turned towards Stella. You haven't told your parents that we're planning on leaving the continent, right? Stella replied with a snort. Not for a dragon's horde. They won't believe my power until I show it to them, and even then they'll try to deny me. I worry the same of our father, Arl said, sharing a complicated look with Sarah. He's given us more freedom than your parents, but my bones say he'll fight to keep us nearby. Everybody glanced at Kachai. He replied nonchalantly. Kia will ask if I am certain. I will tell her I am, and she will not obstruct us. He tilted his head up, his aura spreading around him to illuminate the ledge. I anticipate seeing the light in her eyes as she feels my power. Stella shielded her face from the light and crawled into the pile of blankets that was her bed. It's a fight for tomorrow. Can I skip my watch? I didn't sleep last night. Nathan glanced towards Kachai. Want to split her watch? I won't have a challenging conversation waiting for me tomorrow. Arl cut in with a wry comment. You'll just need to prevent the council from tearing you apart trying to get that book once you tell them what it is. Kachai nodded his acceptance. I must meditate to replenish my faith for the flight tomorrow. We do not all possess infinite resources, he said, shooting a mildly sour look at Stella. The next day, Stella confirmed that Nathan was scheduled to speak to the Council of Gemor soon after they arrived. She'd expected it to be harder to schedule the 7 guildmasters on the council, but as soon as she'd mentioned that Nathan needed to speak to them, they'd cleared the time. It was a good thing, too. The heirs were planning to spend as little time in Gemor as possible to lessen the risk of assassins. They'd fly to the city, do their business, and then head south to Litcliffe to find a ship. I'm surprisingly nervous about the meeting with the council. There's a lot to go over, and I worry they won't accept that the endings are coming, or how important the Liber Physicae is. Nathan sighed, closing his eyes for a moment and telling himself that the meeting would go fine. Sudriel was on the council as the guildmistress of the adventurers, and he'd heard Herden had taken over the Crafters Guild again after the impact of the firearms insights. That was good. They'd listen to him and appreciate the insights he carried, and he would be able to release Herden from the oaths he'd had her swear on using his insights. Still, there are 7 guildmasters total, and they vote on courses of action. I hope the rest will take my warning seriously. They were getting close to Gemor, and Nathan looked down on the foothills. He could just pick out the place where the grave tangle had almost killed him, the the giant traders and the vanguard. He'd been saved by the heir's parents, the guardians of Gemor. It had been his first introduction to how dangerous the world of Davra really was. Now I'm confident I can kill a grave tangle myself. So can Kachai. Stella could probably handle one if she had somebody to distract it. We've outgrown the guardians. They came over the final foothill, revealing the giant ruin of old Gemor, with the mountain in the center that bore the living city of Gemor. It was still an impressive sight, but less so now that Nathan had seen the Ascendant Academy. The first time he'd seen the massive city, he'd wondered what could have destroyed it. Since then he'd seen dungeons and the armies they could spawn. He no longer had to speculate what could destroy a city the size of old Gemor. He knew. Chapter 22. A tainted return. Ever since Nathan had picked up his magical senses, the transit roads of old Gemor had confused him. They just didn't seem to follow the rules for normal mana-based magic. When he'd learned about wizardry, he'd wondered if it could explain the spatial nonsense that went on with the roads. Now, he'd asked his friends if he could stop and examine the roads so he could satisfy his curiosity. He stood in a clear area just to the side of the enchanted road, with his senses focused on the grandiose enchantment buried underneath the cobbles. The roads were suffused with just as much wizardry as the Ascendant Academy had been. However, there were more differences than similarities between the two ancient wonders. The transit roads of Gemor weren't aware in any way and didn't seem to have any kind of monitoring component. It was just a stationary enchantment, albeit a very advanced one on an enormous scale. He delved deeper into the feeling of the wizardry, noting how it was different from what he'd encountered before from Badud and the Academy. It felt less tangible, less focused on matter and more focused on the fabric of space. Dimensional-flavored wizardry. It's not a different type the way there are different mana types, but it feels like the entire spell is in a slightly different wavelength that is more in tune with spatial effects. Wizard's Detection 9 achieved. The other heirs lounged around the courtyard. They were keeping a wary eye on the ruined buildings of old Gemor. The monsters that prowled these ruins weren't much of a threat to them anymore, but even a stalker could claw your face off if it caught you by surprise. They left Nathan alone. He had enough of a track record of staring at weird magical things for them to trust him that far, but he had promised not to break it first. I probably could break it. Isn't that a scary thought? I bet it would be enough to rank up Arcane Nullfield. Definitely not going to do it. Gemor depends on these roads, and I think this enchantment spans the Tokyo-sized ruins of old Gemor. He dove deeper into the network of wizardry underneath him, noticing how it stretched out to both sides of the road. The magic seemed to be stretching the structure of space and holding it in place. The effect was most notable on the road, where reality was scrunched up and compressed down to facilitate the fast travel effect. But the web stretched out across the city, subtly expanding reality in all directions. This wizardry is also creating more space inside the walls, though it's not a significant effect except when compounded across the city. I wonder if anybody's ever noticed. It seems like a lot of effort for a relatively small effect. I wonder if there's another reason they did it. Nathan drew his brows down and closed his eyes as he held the structure of the wizardry in his head. It was taut, but the magic wasn't doing any work. It was like supporting two heavy weights by connecting a rope to both and then hanging them from a tree. This isn't just a spatial compressing spell linked to a spatial expansion spell. If I understand wizardry properly, both of those would take constant energy to maintain. But somehow this magic has linked them together to support each other. It's completely stable, self-maintaining, and has no obvious failure modes unless tampered with. Let's not do that. Wizard's Meditation 10 achieved. He opened his eyes and breathed out a long breath. I can't use the transit roads. At best they won't work for me, at worst old Gemor explodes. Arl snorted. Is that all you learned from 10 minutes of silent contemplation? We were planning to fly over them anyway, Nathan smirked back. I also got 2 rank cups, both to unique skills. I hope your own fire burns you, Arl replied, shaking his head in mock disgust. Ranking up skills by sitting and studying ancient magic. I should have been a mage. Stella spoke up, sounding dour. I can't even feel what he's talking about. It's all blasphemous twisting of space. My parents don't know either, unless they've been holding secrets from me. And nobody can explain wizardry to me either. Nathan scratched his head awkwardly as they climbed over the buildings and set course for the center of the ruined city. I think it's easier from the anti-mage perspective. Also, this wizardry is pretty subtle compared to what Badud was throwing around. That made it a lot easier. They flew in silence for a time before descending into the large open square before Gemor's enormous walls and making for the gates. Kachai let out a long, satisfied sigh as they approached. It is good to be home. The air smells right here. Nathan resisted the urge to make a snarky comment about them leaving and never coming back. Koch already knew. He was just enjoying the familiarity while he still could, and it would be cruel for Nathan to rub salt in the wound. The guards at the gate of Gemor gave them the stink eye as they approached. One whipped out an enchanted monocle to scan them for unwanted magical signatures, like mental magic or parasitic monsters. She squinted through the lens and tilted her head as if trying to make the image better. Nathan's aura had been floating around them in a loose haze. It wasn't enough to interfere with any of the air's magic items, but it was enough to block most sensory magics. He withdrew it and the guard blinked in shock at what was revealed. She held up a hand. Halt! You've got the mana signatures of. She squinted through the monocle again. I don't even know what that is. We need to check you out carefully. And as for you, she gestured to Nathan, you're a problem. I will need an accounting of what you've been doing and will need individual interviews. He opened his mouth to protest, then closed it. They didn't have much time, and he didn't want to spend hours getting interviewed by the Gemor guards to prevent them from bringing a cursed magical item into Gemor. But the poor guard was just following protocol. The whole situation still made his recent paranoia tingle. This might be justified, but it would leave the heirs vulnerable. A good assassin could infiltrate the guard, and it would be a great way to get close to us without arousing suspicion. But we're elite adventurers now. Stella said questioningly, gesturing around. We're the heirs, you know, took Halsmith, destroyed Giant's Rest. Are your ears closed to the world? The guard gave them a hard look. Sure, but we must be stone certain that you aren't bringing danger with you. She glanced around as if seeking input but spoke again before anybody else had the chance to chime in. Hear me, we'll do this as quickly as we can. Let's split you up so the magical signatures aren't interfering. Then you'll show me the new items and explain what you've done to ensure their safety. Nathan kept his face blank as everybody around him nodded in acceptance. On the face of it, this seemed like a reasonable way to deal with them. But his memory was perfect, and this was not how the guards of Gemor dealt with potential risks. They didn't split people up and examine them individually. They kept tabs on them and reported potential dangers up the chain. But this one guard seemed very intent on interviewing each of them individually. I'm guessing the lead guard is an assassin. I'm not completely certain, so I'm going to wait for confirmation. I should be the primary target, so if I go with her first, then that should trigger her to act. I need to warn the heirs. I'll go first, he said amiably, and the guard nodded her acceptance, turning to lead him towards the gate. He glanced back at the heirs with a wry smile on his face. Just like coming back from the fortress foundry, when we were fleeing Khazar's anger and ran into Badud and Tial. Stella blinked in surprise, and Kachai's brows drew down, but Nathan had already turned to follow the guard into the darkness of the tunnel through the massive wall. He was on high alert, his senses tuned for the slightest indication that they were about to be attacked while trying to seem completely at ease. High-tier disguise 4 achieved. That feels like confirmation, both that she's an assassin and that I managed to hide my suspicion of her. I'm just an oblivious adventurer, back from the wilds and trusting the guards to keep the city safe. The moment Nathan stepped into the darkness beneath the gate, the woman turned to face him. Her movement was slow and casual, and she had an apologetic look on her face as if she was sorry for the delay. But Nathan felt the heir's attention slide away from them as her offhand struck with casual speed. The limb stretched towards him, stabbing a dagger towards his gut. Nathan swept his hand down, striking her in the wrist hard enough that the dagger spun away and clattered against the stone wall of the tunnel. The assassin's other hand reached out, seemingly empty. Nathan caught the blow, holding tight onto her hand. He grabbed the arm he just deflected with his other hand and glared into her face. "Who hired you? How many more are there?" She merely sneered up at him, triumph written across her features. "Dead men don't need answers." "Huh," Nathan said. Then he felt a numb feeling creep up his arm from where he'd grabbed her fist. There was a faint prickling feeling from where a needle attached to a ring had dug into his flesh. Some skill had prevented him from feeling it until he focused on the injury. Now he'd been injected with a strong paralytic. The poison pumped through his blood, quickly reaching his heart and from there spreading through the rest of his body. It tried to shut down every muscle it found, including his heart and lungs, but it achieved precisely nothing. "I think she's got skills to let her blades get through my skin and more to enhance her poisons. Still not enough for an immortal body rank." He grinned down at the assassin. "I don't seem to be dead. Do I get answers now?" She snarled and twisted in his grip, fighting not to get away but to stab him some more. He held on even as her arms undulated wildly. Then she twisted and kicked out at him, a hidden blade in her shoe managing to score across his face. She subsided, looking up in satisfaction as black necrosis spread across Nathan's skin. The smile died as the black patch faded away. Nathan raised an eyebrow. "You done?" Her face was grim. "You can't resist every poison." She started struggling again and Nathan sighed and headbutted her. She rocked back, dazed. Then she snapped back, the blow entirely ignored, and scratched him with a blade strapped to her. Yet another poison coursed through his veins far more quickly than it should. He broke her arm over his knee. A moment later, the injury vanished as if it had never been. It didn't heal. It just reverted to the healthy state of a moment before. She flailed further, trying to stab or kick him but unable to escape his grasp. So Nathan did the only thing he could think of. He swung her bodily into the wall, slamming her hard enough to shatter her ribcage. He didn't release his grasp on her arms and watched as she recovered from the blow in a split second, transitioning from badly injured to perfectly healthy without any intermediate stages. He whip-cracked the assassin's arms downwards to slam her skull into the ground, cracking it like an egg. A moment later, she was perfectly healed. Even the blood and brain matter sprayed across the ground gone as if it had never been. This can't go on forever. Even my healing skill has limits. Let's find hers. He slammed her into the wall again, causing near-fatal injuries that once again vanished. For more times she recovered instantly from near-fatal wounds, though she couldn't do anything with Nathan jerking her around and viciously smashing her into one solid stone surface after another. On the 5th strike, the injuries remained, but Nathan had gotten into the rhythm of it and cracked her against the ground one more time. More bones broke, and he looked down at the brutal injuries he'd caused. Very dead and staying that way. Spellslayer has leveled to 504. You have killed the renowned assassin Sail Zithrai, escaping her death mark. Void of Magic has leveled to 718. You have struck down a deadly assassin. There was a sudden burst of noise behind him as the guards and the heirs suddenly noticed what was going on now that the assassin was dead. The guards hadn't been prepared for a fight, but the heirs were. It wasn't even a contest as Stella knocked them all down with a gust of wind, Arl and Koch standing overhead with weapons raised. One of them snarled at them and held up a polished stone that was blinking with an orange light. "We've called the Adventurers Guild. Don't charge into that dungeon. Surrender." Nathan walked over, dragging the corpse of the guard. "What's her name?" The guards frowned, looking at the corpse of their compatriot dully. "Yill," one of them ventured. "She's only been on gate duty a few days." Nathan held out the dagger he'd plucked from the ground. The edge shone with an oily film of poison. "She tried to stab me with this. Have any of you ever met her before the past few days? Why was she leading gate duty if she was so new to the guard?" The guards blinked up at him, then one of them shook her head and cursed. "Harpy tits, an imposter with social skills, ending damned strong ones to fool us." She held out a hand so they could help her up. "We'll need to explain to avoid a fight with our reinforcements." After a moment of eyeing the hand cautiously, Arl grasped it with a metal-clad gauntlet and pulled the guard upright. Kachai stepped back and allowed the rest to clamber to their feet. A familiar voice called down the tunnel. "Come through one at a time, weapons down unless you intend to lose the hands that bear them." Arl yelled back, "Greetings, father. An assassin just tried to kill Nathan. She's dead and we're all good here. Can we come through?" There was a moment of silence, then Stanel's voice came back, sounding grumpy. "As your flame calls, Sarah first, weapons down." The heirs looked around and shrugged, then Sarah walked into the tunnel, stowing her revolvers into the dimensional pouches at her side. One of the guards scowled. "But the security check," Nathan snorted. "Between my anti-magic and Kachai's divine magic, we're clean. If we're not, then your enchantments aren't going to pick it up. Besides, we're going to go talk to the Guardians of Gemor. If something goes wrong, aren't they the ones who would deal with it regardless?" The guard shrugged and looked around at his peers. "I don't have the stones to say no." All of the other guards nodded their agreement, and the heirs trooped into Gemor. They were met with a semicircle of 30 adventurers on the other side, with Stanel standing directly opposite the opening. But the danger was past, and Stanel was fiercely hugging his kids. All of the other adventurers had relaxed and most were starting to head back towards the guild, sheathing weapons and snuffing magic. Stanel finally released Arl and Sarah, beaming at the rest of the heirs. "Your arrival sparks our courage. Onwards to a party for the ages." Then he shot a look towards Nathan. "Except you, Sudriel and the council are waiting in their chambers. I'll be off then." He met each of his friends' eyes, finding trust and resolve in their expressions. Arl handed him the Liber Physici, and Nathan leapt into the air to climb the hill without exposing himself to any more would-be assassins. Chapter 23. Long-awaited bureaucracy. Gemor was built up the slope of a mountain shaped like a curling wave just about to crash. When Nathan had first climbed to the very top to swear the adventurer's oath upon the seal, he'd passed by the council chambers. They were built at the very back of the shallow cavern formed by the overarching stone of the mountain. At the time, he'd thought them incredible works of craftsmanship, rivaling the best that Earth had to offer. The council chambers were an original construction of old Gemor and had a swooping artistic architecture that pleased the eyes. Since then, he'd seen dozens of examples of ancient architecture, including the Ascendant Academy itself. The council chambers were still equal to any of them in style, if not in size. It was also definitely a dungeon at some point. Likely conquered when Giants Rest first established a colony out here to loot the surrounding ruins, before their slaves revolted. The guards on the building opened the front doors as he landed in the courtyard before the grand building. Off to the side was another gate, this one leading to the staircase tunneled out of the mountain that led up to the seal. It was locked and barred. Nathan nodded to the guards as he strode into the council building, finding a wide stone corridor which took him deeper into the building before splitting off in two directions. There were helpful signs stuck onto the stone, and Nathan followed them towards the central council chambers. He passed by clerks carrying scrolls or clay tablets. Glancing through an open door, He saw a grand vaulted room with a defaced stone statue on the other side. It had been converted into administrative space, and the room was busy with people sorting through shelves to find old records. He was interrupted by a crash as a clerk dropped her load. The woman's eyes were fixed on the book in Nathan's hands, her eyes wide with shock. She looked up and met his eyes before blushing scarlet and turning to flee. He blinked at the interaction but decided not to pursue. Likely a skill of some kind. Maybe it let her read some of what's in here, or just told her of its value. I should have brought it in a dimensional bag if I wanted it to stay secret. Soon enough he arrived at the council chambers proper, and walked into the center of a surprisingly small room with a raised, semicircular dais at one end. From the magical circuitry scattered around, it was obvious that something massively powerful had once occupied the central space, and it looked like dozens of statues had once occupied the dais. But now that space had been filled by 7 large desks. Behind them sat the Council of Gemor, elders all. Nathan knew Sudriel and Herden, but he didn't recognize the other 5. They represented the 7 guilds of Gemor. Beyond the adventurers and crafters were the guards, the villagers, the farmers, the gatherers, and the traders. 3 for Gemor, 3 for the villages, and 1 to tie them all together. All of the guild masters were old and grizzled, and each looked down on Nathan with the weight of long experience. Sudriel was the first to speak. The Antimage has returned with urgent words for us, but first let us recall your deeds. You recently freed Halsmet and defeated the army sent to reclaim it. Then you became an assassin to infiltrate Giant's Rest, where you defeated a quester and cast down the Ascendant Academy. She paused, looking around at the other council members. Her words hadn't been intended for Nathan, but to remind the others who they were dealing with. She turned her gaze back to Nathan. What more blasphemous secrets of Kali's do you bring to us? You struck at Halsmet without so much as a warning, another speaker interrupted, a gray-bearded man wearing a breastplate with a sword at his side. He was likely the guildmaster of the guards. A single upset archmage could destroy this city. An old woman sitting to his left shot the man a venomous glare, and a war mage could annihilate a village. She transferred the glare to Nathan. Tell us, Antimage, this news that demands our attention. What other dungeons have you awoken and will now leave in our care? Hold the stalker shit, Herden cut in sharply. He's destroyed Giant's Rest. Don't complain when the dragon's hoard contains some curses. She gestured to Nathan. Speak, and by the endings I hope you bring more gold than smoke and blood. Time for the shit sandwich. Good news, bad news, good news. In Giant's Rest I killed 4 archmages and Badud. The academy was destroyed in the fighting. All of the powerful mages had been summoned there, and I think most of them died. The only archmage I know who survived was Hibril Dho Banas, the leader of Azemer. I convinced him to join Mila in Giant's Rest. An old man with skin like leather interrupted with a snort. He seemed disgusted, not surprised. That message arrived this morning. What kind of blasphemous fool leaves an archmage alive when they have the power to kill him? Nathan returned the hostile gaze evenly. Somebody with divine magic to see the truth. He truly intends to work with Mila to build something new without slavery. I also crippled his magic. He will never again be able to cast a spell larger than a grand fireball. Instead, he'll teach Giant's Rest's magic to the freed slaves. The man's gaze turned pensive. He dipped his head towards Nathan apologetically and shot a meaningful look around the room at the other guildmasters. When no further interruptions were forthcoming, Nathan continued. There were a few more powerful mages in Argeless, but we saved them from an undead army and sent them back to Giant's Rest too. Phaline is also hunting down mages in Lurwick and Scargus, but more must be done. Mila is making something new out of Giant's Rest. You should support her in any way you can. He looked around, seeing that a few of the guildmasters were nodding along while others wore guarded expressions. Ah, politics. He continued laying out his case. Right now, the reborn Giants' Rest is at a pivotal moment. They need everything, and the next few weeks, months, and years will set the tone for the nation they become. If you want a strong ally for Gemor, one with the insights of the Ascendant Academy, the secrets of anti-magic, and the fire of freed slaves, then help them now with adventurers, food, and enchantments. They won't bow to a new master, but they won't forget it. Which do you want to replace Giants' Rest? A strong ally forged in the same fires that birthed Gemor, or broken chaos? Some of the guildmasters made to speak, but Sudriel waved them down and gestured for Nathan to continue. Her raised eyebrows indicated that it was time for him to switch topics. With a thankful nod, he did so. When I killed Badud, I got a notification. He's not dead. Apparently, you cannot kill questers. But the notification said that he can't return to the continent until those who knew him should have died of old age. He won't be able to interfere with what's going on here for 50 or 60 years. Nathan paused, and the gazes of every single guildmaster weighed heavily upon him. "What more?" said the guildmaster of the guards. "What prophecy of death do you fear to speak? Our ears are the only ones listening." Nathan tilted his head in acknowledgement of the man's intuition and resumed speaking. "When I had Badud in my grasp, but before I'd killed him, Badud said he'd bargain what he had to with the other questers to make the ending of history come to this continent early." He raised a hand against the angry inhalations that greeted that statement. He didn't have to reach far into his memory to recall the questers' words. They'd burned themselves into Nathan's brain. He said these exact words: 100 years, 150, and then all of the horrors of history will awaken and scour the land clean. Have you even delved into the depths? Looked for the hidden fortresses in the sky? I anticipate watching joyfully on the day Gemor drowns in ancient magics and monsters beyond imagination. Nathan looked around the room. Then I killed him. The guildmasters exchanged worried looks, conflict forgotten for the moment as they absorbed what Nathan had said. Herden summed it up nicely, swearing sharply. "What a muckgrabber's asshole, angry at the loss and swore a prophecy of death against us all." She glanced around the room. "Can we hope that the price was too high, that he reconsidered calling an ending down upon our heads?" Sudriel's eyes had gone shadowed and her gaze was calculating. "We don't know. Questers have always been the darkest of dungeons. Nathan, it sounds like you knew his ways better than we do. What do you say?" Nathan shrugged. "Badud is a vindictive bastard, and he was mad. I was only keeping him alive because I was trying to cut him off from magic. It didn't work, but I definitely damaged his casting. I think that would leave a grudge. If he had some time to cool down and the price was too high, then he might reconsider. But in that moment, I think he would have paid any price to spite me." Blight and bane. The swear erupted from the weathered old man, his mouth puckered as if he'd just eaten a pile of lemons. "You belong in a dungeon of fools. You angered a quester, and now he will destroy us all." The other guildmasters started muttering similar recriminations. Sudriel rolled her eyes and spoke up, her voice cutting through the rising noise like a blade. "You swore your adventurer's oath to fight the endings themselves. Now it seems that your path is clear. Will you walk it?" Nathan answered her question directly, ignoring the chatter of the shocked guildmasters. "Before he died, Brox told me where to find Saria Pamaris, another quester hostile to Badud. She was the one that Badud mentioned negotiating with to start the ending. She will at least be able to tell me if they actually made a deal and maybe how to stop it. I'll hunt Badud across Davrar if I need to. I have 100 years at least. If I can't prevent the ending before that, then I'll come back to fight it personally." Herden chuckled. "Will you save Gemor as an ancient man?" "One of my unique developments means that I don't age," Nathan said with a small smile. He forestalled the next anticipated question. "I don't believe it can be taught." There was some grumbling to that statement, but it wasn't angry. The guildmasters were used to the vagaries of insights, and if he said it couldn't be taught, they wouldn't contradict him. Not without the equivalent of a master's degree in mammalian cellular biology. Maybe Sham will figure it out, but I'm not going to hold my breath. Sudril's glare was penetrating. Will the heirs go with you? They will. We're being chased by assassins. We've been attacked by two and have gotten messages from Mila that more are following us. So we're leaving for Litcliffe later today to find a ship and hopefully get away. Maybe the quester decided assassins were cheaper than an ending, said the old woman whom Nathan was pretty sure was the representative from the villages. She sounded like she was trying to convince herself. Herden's eyes had found the book. You have a gift for us before you depart. She held a hand out, one eyebrow going up in a silent question. Nathan grinned at her, stepping forward to drop the LitRPG onto the desk. He spoke directly to her, though the words were loud enough for everybody to hear. The heirs helped me write it over the last few days. This is why we were late. We call it the LitRPG. Some of the guildmasters had started talking urgently with each other, ignoring his conversation with Herden. Nathan stepped back to the center of the room and pitched his voice louder to capture their attention. It is a book of insights. Those were the magic words, and everybody turned back towards him, glancing at the book as Herden pulled it towards her and started leafing through the figures, pausing on a diagram of a thermal cycle. That book can change Gemor, Nathan said once the room had quieted down. There are dozens, hundreds of insights in there. Herden's face jerked up in surprise and she looked at him questioningly. You mean, all the insights behind the guns, the ones you withheld from us? Nathan met her gaze levelly. Every insight behind the guns and more. I release you from your oath to me and empower you to release every other crafter who swore it. Those insights will let you make gunpowder and other, better explosives from air, water, and magic. They will let you make massive amounts of high-quality steel and give you ideas what to do with it. There are details of fertilizers there that will help with crop yields and suggestions for new tools and weapons. Weapons that will let low-leveled people destroy a grave tangle from miles away. He raised his hands defensively as the guildmasters looked on in shocked silence. I don't know what will work and what will not. You'll need to develop new skills and magics to fill in the gaps, but I've provided a number of basic insights that should help with that. Stella's added a number of magical insights as well, but there's a lot more to be discovered. He turned towards Sudril. I know you wanted more insights for the archive. The basic information here is the foundation for at least 4 different schools of magic, likely including air, metal, and lightning mana, as well as a few completely new things. Maybe there's heat mana or steam mana. That would be interesting. Gemor already has a lot of crafters who can make powerful enchantments. With these insights and the ideas behind them, they'll be able to do incredible things. If you start an industrial revolution and never stop, then there's a chance that Gemor can survive the ending even if I can't stop it. He stared challengingly at the guildmistress of the adventurers. The one who'd founded the Adventurer Archives, who'd promised to freely distribute powerful insights to raise up all of Gemor. But only if they're shared widely. Don't hide this information. People already know I brought it here, and it will work best if every adventurer, every crafter, and every villager can build upon it. He clasped his hands together and looked around the room. Every single guildmaster was focused on the book in Herden's hands like it was priceless, which it was. Sudril swallowed and spoke, her voice faint. By your light, this dragon's hoard will be used. The withered old man clicked his tongue. No book can save us from the ending of history. Hold your noise, Herden replied absently, looking down at one of the diagrams Stella had made describing how to make an oxygen filter. Get the scribes in here. I want a dozen copies made before the sun goes out, and I will not let this book from my sight until then. The brown-skinned woman looked up at Nathan, faint tears in her eyes. Thank you. Gemor will provide you aid as long as it exists, sworn on my guild. The guildmaster of the guards harumphed, but Sudril cut him off. Agreed. Nathan nodded his acknowledgement. I was being silly about hoarding my knowledge. I'm sorry it took me so long. Heed the warnings in the book, for many of those insights can cut the hand that wields them. Herndon chuckled, continuing to leaf through the pages. You've left us much to discuss and a mountain of work for me. Is there anything else? Nathan hesitated, then blew out a breath. The grave of all giants, the dungeon that the academy was built on. It was something special, something called a grand dungeon. When we destroyed the last of the golems, we got a notification that there were 80 grand dungeons left on the continent, and that defeating the grand dungeon would boost our future class developments. Sudril's face was fixed in a frown, but she didn't appear to consider this groundbreaking information. At least not compared to the bombshells Nathan had already dropped. Thank you. Will you be at the guild if we have questions? He shook his head. We're leaving soon before nightfall to avoid the assassins, but a message to Stella can reach me. Sudril gave him a firm nod. We will follow your flame. May it burn bright. It was a clear dismissal, and Nathan turned to leave the room. Before the door closed behind him, he heard one of the other guildmasters ask, where did these insights come from? That other-world nonsense. How powerful could they be? He smirked, wondering how Sudril and Herndon were going to handle that. They might not have to. The benefit of his insights would be apparent soon enough. Once he was out of the council chambers, he turned his attention upwards, towards the cresting mountain of Gemor that loomed overhead. Time to see what my new senses can reveal about the seal. Chapter 24, Lessons of the Past. Nathan strolled over to the sheer rock wall, inspecting the gate that blocked access to the tunnel that spiraled up to the peak of the mountain. Out of habit, he checked the lock. It was enchanted, but beyond that it was 3 inches of solid steel. It wouldn't be impossible for him to break, but it would be loud, painful, and slow. But unlike past locks, this time I can just ask. The guards at the front of the council chambers were openly watching him and stiffened when he turned towards them and jerked his thumb at the gate. Can you let me through? The older guard had an answer ready. We need orders to unlock the gate from a guildmaster or an elite adventurer. The other guard rolled her eyes. Syl, you know who this is. He may not officially be an elite yet, but he killed the Endings Damned Academy. He was just alone with the council. Let him through the blasphemous gate. The first guard was unconvinced, and Nathan sighed. I can fly up if I need to, it's just tiring. He started walking straight up into the air. The older guard relented. Harpy's tits, fine, don't be burned by your own fire and don't break the seal. I've heard about what you can do. Nathan watched as the guard walked over to unlock the gate with a large key. I won't, but do you know why? What would happen if somebody does break the seal? Why do the adventurers defend it every solstice? The guard shrugged, yanking open the heavy gate with the whine of unlubricated hinges. It's a rule of the guilds, defend the seal over all else. Kentilla, do you know? The other guard's dark brows creased in thought. The book says it was a rule established by a quester. If the seal is broken or captured by monsters, then Gemor will share its fate. That's the only light I know. Nathan gave a small bow. Thank you. You can lock the gate behind me. I'll come down another way. The older guard sighed again, relocking the gate. You certainly act as an elite adventurer. He glared at Nathan. Don't break it. Nathan held his hands up defensively. I won't, probably. I just want to try to understand it. And if I think I can open it safely, well, I should probably grab the heirs and their parents before I do that. He jogged up the steps, remembering the other 2 times he'd climbed this passage. The first had been the night of the solstice, when he'd been forced to duel Simla in order to prove himself worthy of swearing the adventurer's oath. And I ended up swearing a different oath than normal. Instead of merely swearing to protect Gemor against all comers, I swore to fight the endings themselves. To change things, not just maintain the status quo. That felt like so long ago. He'd been level 52 in Spellbreaker Juggernaut back then, and so much less powerful than he was now. But it had marked a turning point in his life. The secret of his origins had been revealed to all of Gemor, and he'd found acceptance regardless. In turn, he'd found knowledge of the endings and found another purpose. The second time had been shortly thereafter, when Kia had dragged him to the top of the mountain to give him the airwalking insight. He hadn't known at the time that she'd kick him off the mountain, but it had granted him the slow fall, talent which had developed into airwalking to complete his build. That had been the moment Nathan had really started to become an elite adventurer. Directly afterwards, Kia had impressed upon him the exact magnitude of the oath he'd sworn, and made Nathan understand how deadly Davrar was by showing him the majesty and power of old Gemor in its heyday. So much has happened. I didn't truly know what I was getting myself into back then in swearing to fight Giant's Rest. I'd been in a few fights, but I hadn't killed anybody yet. If I knew the path I would walk back then, would I have climbed this mountain? He considered the question as he climbed through the darkened tunnel, repeating his long-ago pilgrimages. I've changed since then, grown harder, more willing to do bad things for good reasons. But I've seen those good things follow, too. Housemit is free and Giant's Rest along with it. I took down an empire of slavers, and the cost was lower than I could have expected. I would do it all again, and that's really all you can ask of a decision. Though I would have tried to save Nornan from that ashblood cobra. He and his team would have benefited so much from the adventurer's archive. And I wouldn't have killed some of those mages in Housemit. They didn't all deserve to die. Not every mage was evil. Most of them were just living in the system until I broke it. Death isn't always the answer. What about now? Nathan was about to embark on a journey full of unknown perils with yet another impossible goal. Was there anything he should be thinking about, any preparations he needed to make? I need to understand more about the games of the Questers, and the seal is part of that. It doesn't usually get attacked on the solstice, but when it does, a Quester arrives to help defend it. Maybe I can find out why. He emerged from the tunnel into the sunlight atop the empty mountain. There were no railings or platforms, just an expanse of uneven rock that dropped off in all directions towards the ruined city of Old Gemor that surrounded the lonely mountain. The only examples of worked stone were the tunnel Nathan had just emerged from, the plinth that served as the stage for the ceremony, and the seal. The seal itself was a 40-foot wide stone circle that looked like a giant vault door. It had seams where different pieces of rock joined together, and the stone surface was covered with spidery symbols. On the night of the solstice, those symbols would be glowing, and a pillar of magic would reach upwards from the seal. It sure looked like it was recharging the sun. Nathan found himself apprehensive about approaching the seal and instead wandered around the peak for a few minutes. He found the spot where Kia had kicked him off the edge and glanced downwards. He'd completely lost any fear of heights with airwalking, but it was still an impressive drop. Next was the divot in the mountaintop that marked the place where he'd dueled Simla. The other adventurer had set off a magical grenade after calling Nathan out for not being native to Davrar. I wish Simla had survived the fortress foundry. He seemed like he was starting to rethink the party line of the traditionalist adventurers, though they stopped mattering much once Housemit was liberated and Khazar died. I'm not as sad about Khazar getting killed. That man was an abusive asshole who wanted me dead. Finally, Nathan approached the stage set next to the seal. It was the central focus of the ceremonies on the solstice, where the adventurers spoke eulogies for those fallen before the guildmistress told the tale of endings. Committing the tale of endings to memory is what developed enhanced memory to high tier. Let's see, how did that go? He could see Sudriel in his mind's eye with perfect clarity, reciting the ancient warning. The tale of endings is not something written. It is for times when writing is lost, times when civilization dies, when there is no priority but survival. Remember the endings when cities die and the land breaks. If you lose all else, if nothing else will survive, preserve yourselves and preserve the tale of endings. This is the story of how the world ends. We record not what was lost, but how it was lost. The prophecy will allow survival of the endings. The world has ended before and will end again. The order of the endings is the only part of the story that truly matters. Magic gods, monsters, undeath, wrath, storm, deicide elements, history, spite, silence. There'd been a bit more, but it seemed like the order of the endings was the most important part of the tale of endings. The last ending had been the ending of elements, and the next was the ending of history. Brox had mentioned participating in the ending of deicide, but most of what Nathan had gotten from the story was that the endings were effectively the end of the world, and he'd sworn to do his best to stop them. That memory was clear as Nathan ascended the steps to stand in the very place he'd sworn the oath. By the endings of Davrar and the wonders of Earth, I vow to fight the endings themselves. I will prevent them from happening at all, if it can be done. May my class be stripped from me if I forswear. I will protect the people of Gemor from that which would assail them, be it monster, person, or ending. He considered those words. He hadn't known if it was possible to stop the endings when he'd sworn the oath, but that hadn't stopped the heirs from swearing it right alongside him. Now they were all committed to venturing out into Davrar to find questers and get some answers, but it would be nice to learn as much as he could before he left. Nathan looked down at the stone of the seal and sat down on the stage to study it up close. Time to see if I can find any more clues about the endings. He focused his magical senses onto the ancient stone. He'd noticed as he approached that the seal wasn't emitting any blatant magic, which tracked with what he'd heard earlier. If normal magic senses could understand what was going on with the seal, then it wouldn't be nearly so mysterious to the adventurers of Gemor. There was certainly wizardry going on, and a lot of it. The first layer appeared to be some kind of shielding enchantment that blocked magical perception. It was subtle but effective, creating a wizardly distortion that blocked magical signals. Nathan didn't want to try and break any part of the seal's magic. He didn't understand what it did, but he knew that any damage could jeopardize Gemor, but he didn't have to break it. He defeated 10-layer locks inside the Ascendant Academy, and half of the challenge had been seeing what lay past the first few layers. He closed his eyes and started spending focus while concentrating on the seal, tuning out the interference from the shield. After what must have been nearly half an hour of concentration, he found himself able to see the structures beyond. Wizard's Detection 10 achieved. The next layer was powerful reinforcement magic that made the seal itself nearly impervious to damage. Nathan was pretty sure a disintegrate spell wouldn't do a thing, and the only weapon he'd seen that could scratch the enchantment and the stone it protected was the black-bladed sword Brox had dropped when he died. Unless I strip the wizardry with my anti-magic, then it's just normal stone that Stella could mold with her earth mana. Past that was where it got complicated. Nathan had gotten used to detecting mages by sensing their mana pools, which lay in a kind of metaphysical dimension that paralleled the physical one. Unless he was mistaken, underneath the seal was a massive construct that lay primarily on the other side of that barrier, made of wizardry and mana. He frowned as he started mapping out the machine. It was enormous, and there were parts here and there that appeared blank. It was like the parts of the mana pools Nathan couldn't sense, where there was something, but he couldn't get a feel for it. Only about half of the giant mechanism was actually active, with power flowing through in the form of both mana and wizardry. He followed the flows farther into the mountain and then felt his mouth go dry. There was a colossal mana pool down there, buried deep within the stone. He'd been hanging out with Stella for a while now and had gotten used to being near enough mana to shatter a mountain. Some of the archmages he'd run into had also possessed enormous mana pools, but this power dwarfed all of them and it wasn't even full. Feels a bit over half full actually, which makes sense. We're a bit over halfway to the next solstice. This thing is storing power for that event. I suppose it takes a lot of mana to keep the sun ticking, but there was more to it than that. The mechanism was both absorbing and releasing ambient magic into the world around it, seeming to store away a portion of what passed through. The mechanisms that split the mana were the portions Nathan couldn't sense, and he was puzzling through what they did. Hooked directly to them was a fairly obvious switch on this side of the metaphysical barrier, right on the other side of the stone doors of the seal. He didn't know if the wizardry he was feeling had a physical counterpart, but he was guessing that it did. The switch had 3 positions and was currently set to the middle one. It felt like the only controls in the entire system, but he couldn't figure out what it did any more than he knew what the entire machine did. It changed something about the mana-splitting portion of the seal, but he didn't know what. Whatever it did, the amount of power going through it was ludicrous, on the scale of megatons of explosives. The only thing I can think of that would use that amount of power is the ending. Maybe one side makes it happen sooner, the other later. Nathan tried to map out what would happen for each of the potential switch positions but quickly ran into a wall. Each of them seemed to provide inputs into mana splitters as well as the rest of the mechanism, and he quickly lost track of all of the connections in the bowels of the magic. He let out a frustrated breath. I should be able to figure this out. I've got the skills, but what does the seal as a whole do? It's more complicated than it needs to be to just control what happens on the solstice. He considered activating the switch, pushing it one direction or the other. It wouldn't be particularly hard with his aura. He could do it from here, and if something bad happened then he could just switch it back. Let's hold off on that. I can infer the parts I can't feel from what's around them. Most of them seem to be for interacting with the ambient mana, processing it somehow. What about the rest? Nathan spent some time and focus trying to suss out the details of each invisible section of the machine. He made some progress. Some of the blank sections seemed to swap the type of mana that went into them, since the mana conduits were specialized differently on the inputs and the outputs. But that didn't help him understand the machine as a whole. It was just too big, too much detail for him to fully hold in his head. It was like looking at a computer model of a tokamak fusion reactor and trying to figure out what it did from first principles. Growing more and more frustrated, he reached out with his aura, intending to flip the switch to the left. He kept his attention on the machine below, anticipating how it would change when he adjusted the controls. Then he froze. His eyes opened, and he exhaled and reeled his antimagic back in slowly. I really shouldn't poke this. I don't think I'll mess it up, but the risk is significantly higher than 0. I'm just here to assuage my curiosity. That's not sufficient justification to risk killing everybody on this continent. He took a mental step back. He was missing the forest for the trees. He needed to hold the entire machine in his head, but not necessarily to the highest level of detail. He wanted to know the purpose of what it did, not the exact details of how it happened. That could come later. The shape solidified in his mind, a teardrop of metaphysical architecture wrapped around the largest mana pool he'd ever seen. Ambient magic flowed into it from the world and was emitted back out once again, like the breath of a god. But that mana was altered slightly. The ambient mana that flowed in was a mix of everything around Gemor, with life and stone and air and fire and every other component of Davrar. But what flowed back out had a different profile, cleansed of something. All scraps of death mana were scrubbed away, along with crystal and a few other kinds Nathan couldn't name. He would never have noticed it without his recent encounter with the grave tangle and its corruptive death magic. It's a filter. It's filtering out the death mana and anything else inimical to life. Congratulations, you have developed the wizard's meditation, utility skill into tranquility. Utility skill, tranquility. Your mind will be calm and focused under all conditions, and your mind's eye is expanded.